Hi, my name is Jenny Matz, and it is my great pleasure to be here today with Perry Wolff to interview him for the Archive of American Television, and we're in the library of the Belmont Senior Living Center in Westwood, California on February 27th, 2015. Hi, Perry. Thanks so much for being here today.
You're welcome.
So we're just going to take about 10 minutes to talk about your early life and childhood. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what was your name at birth and when you were born?
Well, it was a conflict. My mother called me Perry, but my father registered me as Paul because he thought Perry was effeminate. So I had to go to court later on. But I was born in Chicago, 1921. It's right after the Pythagoras had left Chicago. And what was the second part of your question?
You got everything in one, so that's good. And it was, what were your parents' names?
My father's name was Abraham, and my mother's name was Bessie. I think they got together in a saloon because she had a nice voice and he played piano by ear, but they never would tell me that. She was a refugee from Russia, and he had lived in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I don't know, you want to go into General Grant or not?
Well, what did he do for a living?
Well, he had been a miner, a copper miner, and then he went into the garment business and failed, and then he became a salesman, a traveling salesman, with his samples in the car representing a successful dressmaker. And we were in the middle of the Depression, but it didn't hurt much. As I remember, his salary was $75 a week, which, in today's money would be a lot. So we were not impoverished.
And did you have any siblings?
Yes, I had a brother, a brilliant brother, 7 years older than I, who became a famous writer and a good businessman. And he introduced me to literary works. I was reading Eugene O'Neill when I was 11 years old, and I was being quizzed by him. But he was a complicated man. I'd rather talk about me than about my brother. That's not vanity.
Well, do you think that you inherited any traits from your parents?
Well, yes. Music, to begin with, and writing, not painting. Jews were nowhere in painting until the late 18th century. We had one painting in the whole house. It was an Indian looking far into the far west, but that was all. But the books were there all the time. Went to the library 5 days, every week for 5 books. And they were good parents. When I had a crisis in my life, they took care of it. I was kicked out of Northwestern because I was a Jew and I was over quota. And they found a reason to get rid of me. And I went home and on the elevated line, thought of electrocuting myself. I told my father what had happened. He said, "All right, we'll make Indiana today." So I got in the car and we went selling dresses in Indiana. It was a good family. The only time my mother yelled at me, she was behind me one day and she said, "Hang up your clothes. Why do I have to hang up your clothes?" No, I'm so grateful for a family.
What were your interests growing up, and what did you want to pursue at Northwestern?
Well, I wanted a liberal arts. I wanted a liberal arts degree. I didn't want, to me, the university wasn't what universities are now to prepare you for a job. I wanted to know, and I was given the great writers, the painters, and so on. There was on the campus an observatory, a telescope observatory, and I decided that I would like to be an astronomer, but the wind was so cold off Lake Michigan that I decided to go back into the arts. And then after I had started at the University of Illinois, and then transferred to Northwestern because it was closer to home and cheaper in a way. And then I went to Wisconsin, where I got my degree. But I got it after I'd been drafted into the Army.
Can you talk briefly about your experience in the Army and where you served?
Well, yes. Though my sight was so poor, I was trained as a sniper. And I was sent overseas as a sniper. And I got off one shot in Germany, and I wounded German soil. And I went back and said, "This isn't for me." And the company commander said, "Okay, this is an M3. It's like a garden hose. You just..." But I was in the Battle of the Bulge. I was slightly wounded. I wrote a novel about it, and I guess I had PTSD. But see, in World War I, it was called shell shock, and in World War II, they didn't use PTSD; they called it battle fatigue, and I had it. But I got rid of it by myself, pretty much.
How so?
Well, I think I got rid of it because I wrote a novel about it, about me and what I went through and what we all went through. And it was supposedly fiction. It was published, and it got good review.
This was The Friend? This was the title was The Friend?
Well, it's called The Friend. See, the question is really simply, what do you do for an acquaintance? What sacrifice will you make for an acquaintance? Well, you'll get him a cup of coffee, maybe. Well, what sacrifice will you make for a friend? And the sacrifice I made was for my buddy is that I wrote lies in the regimental history with the deal that he would be taken off the front lines, and that happened. And then the last step, beyond friendship is love, and it's all for love. Shakespeare said it first. So it was published.
And then how did you come to work for WBBM Radio? Was radio something you wanted to get into with the writing?
Yeah, I had done when we were after combat, when we were in occupation, we had set up a radio station extolling ourselves. WCIR, the Cowhide Infantry Regiment was and at college I had helped, and I was much taken by radio. So when I came back, a friend of mine recommended me to WBBM in Chicago, and I was put on as an assistant. And at that time, it's a long story. You get it. See, there were tape recorders in the basement of the station, very large ones, and what they would do is take the broadcasts from the East Coast and hold them there and then pass them on to the West Coast. But the machines were very large. However, in that year, a portable tape recorder was invented. It was a big box. I put it in the trunk of my car and had a microphone in the dashboard. And through various means, I was able to record where dope addicts were buying and selling. And there was a drugstore. I usually remember the address, but it's not important. And the police were protecting that drugstore. But we put it on the air, so they had to close it down. Unfortunately, it was owned by the brother of the fellow who was running WBBM. So I got fired. And I went on from there for a little while to soap operas.
And that was the Untouchables, and you won a Peabody Award for that program.
Yes, yeah.
But
it's funny.
But they had to fire you just the same.
Yeah, and I would be buying things, and I bought what was supposed to be cocaine, and I sent it to the University of Illinois Toxicology Department. They called me back, and they said, "Wolff, how much did you pay?" I said, $10. They said, "That's the most expensive after-dinner mint that anybody has ever bought." So I was taken in. And then I went on for a short time, to write soap opera.
Yeah, talk about how did you get your start in television on Guiding Light? And you had moved to New York from Chicago. How did that come
Well, it wasn't television.
At first?
At first, it was radio. And Erna Phillips was the writer. And the show, I was there really to compliment her, because she would play all the parts. She would be Meta, the sophisticated lady, and then she'd be the charming father, with an accent like this, And I was there really to appreciate it. But they moved the show to the coast. And, of course, the actors also had other jobs. I mean, they were, one of them was in the hardware business and so on. And they weren't going to move. So during the move, which took 3 days, we started the move, and the bus went over the mountain and crashed. And while they were in the train taking there, I was reading eulogies for the dead people. So it was a new show. And I don't think that's where I got into television, but it was a little later.
Oh, okay. So you didn't stay with the program that long. You were
No.
So how did you come to CBS, and what were your roles and duties when you first started there? Was that radio or television?
The first was radio. Then I got fired, and then I went to New York. And because I had won an award, I ran into Hubble Robinson. Hubble Robinson was the head of programming. And, see, the award I won, I wasn't allowed to go there. It cost too much. Hubble had picked it up. So I ran into him on the corner of Madison and, I guess, 56th or 57th, and he knew who I was. And he said, "Why don't you come to work for us, in the news department?" I said, "Sure." He said, "What would you want?" I said, "Well, it's fair." He said, $400 a week. I said, "Okay." And that was it. No agents, nothing. And I was sent to the newsroom and to watch the morning news and learn from it what I could. And then, for various reasons, Bill Paley, the big boss, was a member of the Museum of Modern Art, and he wanted a film about the Museum of Modern Art. So I went and did one with a crew. And it was quite successful for Paley. And at the end of that, you see, they needed public service broadcasts, and they had a contract, almost verbal contract, with the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And I was sent there to make a film about them, to make documentaries about them. And I'd like to explain why documentaries had to be made. Have I said this yet?
No, not on camera.
Okay.
And this is the adventure series you're talking about.
That's right. You see, the stations were licensed in the public interest. But there was if they were not in the public interest, there was a provision from the FCC that they could be challenged. We'll do it better than you can. The networks, which are not licensed, would provide the local stations with Ed Murrow, Walter Cronkite. You mean you can do better than this? Now, a license to broadcast is a license to print money. And the best example of that is Lyndon Johnson. Lady Bird had a station that she bought for about $15,000. It wasn't covered by CBS, but then through Frank Stanton and Lyndon Johnson and all that, they got coverage. And that station went from $15,000 to $15 million. And it financed much of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society program. He was able to cut off from his sponsors. And Lady Bird was a brilliant woman.
Do you think they were aware of the propaganda potential from also owning these stations in terms of the politics?
No, he never used it
It was
that
just
way.
for the
No, he
funding.
didn't. Yeah, just I knew her. I'd done the tour of the White House with Jackie, and then I got sent down to, because they thought maybe she would like to do a tour of the White House. Mm-hmm. And I had discovered that they had called in the Signal Corps, and she was in the Red Room, and they had her talking like she was Jackie. And she said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, do you know the people who shot this, the Signal Corps?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Call them and tell them to burn the negative. Burn it, get rid of it, that's not you." And she did. And she was very friendly. And I was invited upstairs, in the president's private quarters for a lunch, which was a great honor. On the other hand, she was on a diet. And it was just coffee and yeah. She was a nice lady. She was a good lady. And she was good for Lyndon. We veered a great deal from broadcasting.
Well, we can jump around.
Yeah.
I do want to go back, though, because we were talking about how you first got the offer on the street to go and observe CBS News and sort of get your start in that. But you wound up producing pretty quickly. And I really would love to hear your take on the 1952 political convention, which was the first televised convention, and how what your role was in that and your memories of it.
No, I remember it well. It was the key point there was it was simultaneous all the way across the country. And Taft had the most delegates and should have been nominated, but Ike was nominated. And instead, and that's because it was, for any number of reasons, but give me a minute to remember. Mm-hmm. See, Taft had the greater number of delegates. He should have been nominated, but he probably would have lost. And General MacArthur was also spontaneously nominated. They rehearsed the spontaneity for half an hour before he came on. But
there was like a big shouting match on the floor, right?
That's right. But the country saw, and the Republican Party saw, that Ike would be elected. And so he was.
Was it just very new with the technology that they weren't quite savvy about how the cameras were conveying them?
No. There were big pauses, and I was sort of directing at the time. When we went from our hotel to the amphitheater, I was with Don Hewitt, and we stopped for lunch at a food joint that had the menu pasted on the wall, and Hewitt said, "I'd like that," and that's what he took to the convention, and you could pick out the letters, so he had a subtitle. That was how subtitles started.
You came up with how the subtitle. You mean for the correspondence?
Yeah,
and the
right.
Delegates and the.
Yeah, and then we bought flashlights because we didn't know where the correspondent was, so we gave him a flashlight and he'd flash it to the control booth. And it was, to my mind, it was the last of the real conventions, because everything since has been worked out in advance and rehearsed.
Were there any other technical challenges that you had to overcome that you recall from that?
Well, our phones went through Bell Telephone. It was primitive enough. And we were on the air all the time, and I was taking pictures of airplanes and all of that stuff. There were no commercials in it. The last honest convention, I think.
And once that aired, I think it gave the Democrats quite an eyeful of how
how to do it. Yeah, how to do it.
But TV really changed everything from that.
Yeah, and I made the mistake of putting a monitor up in the speaker's platform.
What did that do?
Well, they look at it, and there was a guy making his lunch that was on camera. And they would say, "Hey, you're on camera," you know.
Oh, he was actually cooking.
He was cooking at a Sterno stove down there. And so from then on, it was, you're on camera, you know.
Were you personally enjoying the new technology? I mean, was it something that you relished in? And was there stress involved in directing live television?
Well, I just don't remember that well. It was just all fresh and new, and then it was astonishing, and of course, you know, as a former soldier, I admired Eisenhower very much. You know, he had gone to Columbia University. He was running the Columbia for a while, and he had done a good job. Later on, I had a good relationship with him. We discussed the fact that we were 11 ranks apart. I was a private first class, and he was a 5-star general. Now, and I visited him, and we would chat about that. We chatted about that, and then he said, "I have something for you, Mr. Wolff." And I thought, oh, I'll get cufflinks or something. He was in Gettysburg at that point, and he scribbled out something. He said, this is the best butcher in Gettysburg. You can get wonderful sausages there. That was his contribution to me.
I want to jump back also to Adventure for a minute, which was 1953, and what your role was that, and what the role of the American Museum of Natural History had on the program, if you recall.
Well, see, it was before football, and Sundays were called the Sunday Ghetto, and that's where the virtuous programs would be to protect the. And we had CBS had a relationship with the American Museum of Natural History, and we did a couple of years of programs out of there. It had a good film library, but the story of, we did a story on the history of life with a great Darwinian, and they had a lot of exhibits that were interesting, and we did things. We brought snakes into the studio and all of that. And there's an interesting story on Samuel Goldwyn. Have I told you that story?
No.
Well, Paley was a friend of Sam Goldwyn, and Goldwyn wanted his son to get into television. And Paley said, yeah, bring him around. So he was put on my staff, Goldwyn Jr., and we were in very cramped studios. And to get the boom from one studio to another, we had to drop it and go and so on. And Goldwyn's father came in and saw how primitive it was. And he immediately sent for his favorite editor, and he was to edit his son's contribution, but the son didn't realize we were on every week. It's not like that. It's not like a movie picture. So,
can you talk about how big was your crew and your staff, and how fast was the turnaround for these mini it was a series.
Yes.
And was it an hour?
It was, I think, mostly an hour, and it went on for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. And well,
computer just.
We're in a library.
Yes. Okay, we'll pause for the printer. It's printing.
Oh, well.
Robots in the machine, anyway.
Yeah. Where were we? What was your question?
I was just curious about the production, your schedule, how many people were working with you, how quickly you had to turn around these.
Yeah, we had a show every Sunday, mm-hmm. and I had a staff with an editor, a cameraman. Charles Collingwood was the anchor man.
Could you talk about him a little bit? About did you select him to be the commentator?
I think he was handed down to me. And Collingwood was a very, very handsome man. And he was quite bright, too. But he was one of Murrow's boys. And he expected what Murrow had, but he didn't get it. He was very bright and very good. But unfortunately, he cheated a lot on his wife. And later on, when I was doing the thing with Jackie Kennedy, he wanted to be invited to Jackie's room. But he was a brilliant man. And he had a terrible career after that. Married to the wrong woman and disappeared into alcohol, I think. But we had those marvelous scientists, the history of life. Margaret Mead was there.
What was she like to work with?
Well, she was an interesting woman who was very brilliant. you see, anthropology at that point was divided into two parts. One was physical anthropology, and what do I name? I've lost his name, but he was a great man. He would do bones and that sort of thing, but she was doing cultural anthropology. Mm-hmm. So there was a split, and she did a film called Dance and Trance in Ballet. It was an excellent film, and we had her to present it, and she was sort of disparaging about television. You know, television was far below movies and all that sort of thing. But she saw herself in one of the monitors on the floor, and that made a big change in her. You know, she fixed her hair, and then other scientists, and I forget the name of the guy who had climbed the Matterhorn or something like that. But the American Museum had been everywhere around the world, and it was a wonderful source.
Were these shows produced live?
Yeah.
And what were...
There was no way to record.
Mm-hmm. And were there any major mishaps because of that that you recall, or that make it more difficult?
Well, there were two things. Well, the first one was we put the snakes on the floor live. And the second was, oh, damn, so famous.
Did the snakes get loose?
What?
Did the snakes get loose?
Well, the herpetologist who was there was able to take care of them, but the crew was scared shitless, scared witless. And then it was Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he was having some trouble.
Yeah, he just couldn't. He couldn't make out what was going on, and the question was whether the pyramids, the Inca pyramids, had influenced his architecture. But he suddenly got terribly interested in a whale that was hanging from the ceiling in the next studio. So he just walked through and started talking about the whale.
So did you follow him?
Yeah, we followed him, and then there was no way to cut him out. But Wright was an eccentric man anyway. He built.
What were you shooting with at that time? Was this Kinney, or was this 2-inch?
No,
was this?
Well, on what were we registering?
What were you shooting on? This was filmed?
Yeah, kinescope.
Kinescope.
Yeah, kinescope. Later got transferred to tape.
Mm-hmm. I would love to move on to the CBS series Air Power, and how that came about and why CBS asked you to do it, and if you could explain what the series was about.
Well, Air Power was about the rise of the American Air Force, really, but about the whole rise from the Wright brothers on. And I just got picked to do it, I think. And it was Cronkite was going to narrate it. And we were given a biplane, and we could go and shoot anywhere we wanted to. And the Air Force was, of course, it was propaganda pretty much for the Air Force. And I wrote some of it. And I regret some of it.
What do you regret?
Well, I guess it's tied up in one word: Dresden. The bombing of Dresden. There was no reason to bomb it, except we we had the airplanes and the bombs.
And that was covered in one of your. Oh, that was
no.
not covered.
Well, it was incidental, and the Air Force had guys telling me what to do, but it's still the way I feel. You know, we should be, for the bombing of Dresden, we should be put up against war crimes. There was no reason to do it, none at all. The planes were there and the bombs were there. And I'm still, I'm sorry, but I'm still hostile to the Pentagon. The Pentagon's budget this year, by the way, is $889 billion. And we still have troops in Germany and Japan. And anyway, that's another part of the story.
In Air Power, did they cover the bombing of Dresden? And
no, we didn't.
You didn't cover it.
No, but we did area bombardment.
Right.
And no war has ever been solved by aerial bombardment. And but the most valuable piece of film ever recorded about anything was a film on the results of the Hiroshima bomb. That was there, and you can see it. And no hotshot guy said, well, it's just a bomb. You could see the devastation. You could see what happened to people. And all those hawks, in crazy places like North Vietnam or North Korea, or all those guys, or the Russians had the Air Force, but they also had that film. And they saw what the result would be. And it's the reason that the Cold War never went hot, because they saw what would happen to themselves. Where was I? I'm still inflamed.
You are.
Cool me down.
I'll inflame you some. I might inflame you some more. I'm just curious how your working relationship with Cronkite was on that series and his input on it, if any.
Well, I had troubles with him. You see, as the guy behind the shows, I would always work with the correspondent, and I'd say to them, this is what I'm suggesting you do, and this is the backup, but you're the guy who's responsible. And Cronkite just didn't want to do that. He wanted to just read the script. But the key point, the one where he got so mad at me, was in a film called The Selling of the Pentagon. Now, we call it The Selling of the Pentagon, but it should have been called The Shilling of the Pentagon. And Walter had shilled for the Pentagon. He made a film showing how the Pentagon was going to stop the Russians from coming down off the North Pole, and that was bullshit, And when we had the crisis on the selling of the Pentagon, we had to show that Walter had been taken in too, and he blamed me. He blamed me to the point where I was not allowed to walk through the newsroom while he was there. He had Sandy Sokolow at the entrance, and I was not allowed in the newsroom, except on weekends when he wasn't on the air.
Was it that contentious back in the 50s when you were working with him, or not so? I mean, he just wouldn't show up. He would just come to read the copy, and that was it?
That's it. Yeah, and the joke is he pronounced the word O-I-L as oil. And I said, no, it's oil. Oil. He'd say, no, Walter, oil. And that's what's recorded in written history. But he did, he was very good at many, many things. He was, if I can go on just a little bit, but he was very concerned about national affairs in Washington, and thought things outside of Washington didn't interest him much. And so that's why we invented Charlie Kuralt on the road, you see. other parts of America. Charlie was a good guy. He just smoked himself to death.
You actually had a hand in Cronkite being the correspondent for the political conventions, didn't you? Or had he?
No, that had. I don't think that was just. I don't think I had hand in that. That was just called up by the. I think it's Mickelson or Stanton or somebody else.
Okay. Well, I'd like to move on. We're going to get to the selling of the Pentagon, of course, but I'd like to just keep moving chronologically for now. In the 50s, of course, the Hollywood blacklist affected many writers and many people working in the industry, and were you affected by that at all?
Yeah. The blacklist was translated by CBS into a loyalty oath. Are you loyal to the United States of America? And guys signed it. But I really got upset because I had fought in World War II and met the Russians on the Elbe and all that kind of thing, and they knew that, and I wasn't going to have to. Why should I swear again to something that was obvious? If I had risked my life for the United States of America, why the hell the oath? So it went on. And there's an interesting aside. Frank Stanton, who was a capitalist of the best order, hired the FBI guy who was in charge of the list. And he had the office next to mine. So you watch CBS, and if the guy was on, he was clear. And so CBS was but there's a story where I had written a book on the exploits of my regiment, which was itself slanted, and against the requests, I included a list of the men who had died. Now, if you look at divisional histories, they don't give you a list. But this was regimental, and it was smaller, and there was such a list. And this FBI guy who the FBI guy who Stanton had hired had the office next to mine. And I had refused to sign. So we were both, if you excuse me, peeing in the men's room. And I said, "What are you going to do about me? I didn't sign." And he said, "No, but my brother was killed and you put him into the list of the dead. You're clear, you know?" No, that was it. It was stupid, but the pressure, the McCarthy pressure, was very strong at that point. Joseph McCarthy.
Did it filter down into programming and the way that
Well, it's a long story. At that time, the book I had published was in the information agency's library. All over the world, we would send American books. And McCarthy said that there were communist books in there, and he was stopping the flow. And so I was, in a way, I was pleased to be stopped. But that was a serious period.
Did this factor at all into why you left CBS in the mid-50s?
I got fired.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Paley had Bill Paley, the head of CBS, had just about disappeared, and a guy named, he's still in the news, took over. Yeah, it'll come to me in a few minutes.
Oh, yeah?
He's still in. You see him.
We'll come up with it.
But it'll come to it. But he took over, and he was a businessman. And if the program wasn't making money, he didn't want it. And documentaries weren't making money. So he told Howard Stringer, who was the head of CBS, to get rid of somebody. And I didn't want to work for the same guy, so I quit. He fired me at the same time, and I then had friends at PBS, and I went over there.
Mm-hmm.
What's his name?
We're not talking about Mickelson.
No,
Yeah.
no, not Mickelson.
Okay.
No. He's still there.
We'll think of it.
Yeah.
So at that point, I mean, were you more interested in pursuing documentary than staying in the news division? And what was it at PBS that appealed to you? How was it?
Well, it was the ability and the money to make documentaries, and my wife was a great artist, had brought me back into art, and I was able to find the money to do the artists. So I did Picasso. I'd done one for CBS too, and Matisse. I knew Matisse's son very well. Van Gogh, and the Impressionists. So that's what I did there.
What were the circumstances that you returned to CBS in the early 60s, I think? And you came back to New York?
Oh no, we're way beyond that now.
We are way beyond
Yeah.
that? But the next thing was the tour of the White House, I think that we were...
Oh yeah, that's right.
But that was...
That was at CBS,
Yeah.
yes.
So how did you come back? You had left CBS, you went to PBS, and then...
No, I hadn't, no.
Oh.
I was still at CBS.
Oh, for this, okay.
Yeah, and there was a guy named Blair Clark. Blair Clark had been the second string correspondent in Paris, and had been a friend of mine when we were living in Paris. And let me see if I can. He became the head of a working head of CBS News, working for Paley, and he suggested oh yeah, well he'd also been with Jack Kennedy, and we knew about Jackie's plans to do a tour of the White House, and we wanted to do it.
Well, she had wanted to do a book originally or something like that? It wasn't conceived of for television initially, right?
No, she wanted a lovely picture book.
A picture book.
Yes.
Okay.
But the president wanted her on camera, and I got picked. I don't remember why. Oh yeah, well Blair picked me to do it. I went down and saw her, and we did do, in one day we did the whole tour of the White House. That's one day shooting.
She was very prepared for...
Yes, she was, and so were we. I had a team that we knew what she was going to talk about, and we had a system worked out. And of course, Collingwood was the correspondent. And we had she was a brilliant woman. I wrote a script of what the questions might be, but she was so far ahead of me that she didn't need it. And we did the whole thing in one day. Frank Schaffner was the director, and Schaffner became a great Hollywood director.
Had you worked out with the White House what was going to happen that day? Or?
Yeah, we told them what was happening, and we'd bring the cameras in, and how we were going to shoot, and so on, and locked off the visitors for the day, and then waited for her. And I'd prepared all these things if it was just going to be an interview, but she was so brilliant, that was not what's going to happen.
And how did you find out that's not what was going to happen? How were you clued in?
Well, she had a press secretary named Pamela Tourneur, and I worked through her. Pamela I don't know whether I want to tell you the story.
Yeah.
Well, she was one of Kennedy's girls. See, she had an apartment on the other side of Lafayette Square on the ground floor. And Jack would just bound over there and have her and come back. But the scandal was that the people who owned the place were very moral, and they picketed themselves. And we had pictures of the president's mistresses here. Well, we never used them, of course. But she was the press secretary. And Jackie knew what was going to happen. So we were ready for it. We had studied every artifact that she might discuss, and she had too. She was wonderfully prepared. And we just started shooting.
Wasn't there a story of you had 3 scripts with 3 colors?
Yeah.
You'd sent over?
Yeah. One script was if she was just going to be interviewed. The next is if she was going to show us some pictures. And the third was if she was actually going to do a tour, But she threw my script away. She was ready. She was a brilliant woman.
And so you didn't rehearse with her beforehand?
No, but we'd sort of block it out as we got the cameras in. She would say what she was going to talk about. So it was all shot with remote cameras.
But again, all in one day, so you didn't
all in one day, and then I'll never forget this thing. The editors were wonderful, and they decided that they could throw something together that night. They could throw something together that night and show. And the Kennedys had invited somebody for dinner. Excuse me. And there was a moment when we were playing back something, and Jack Kennedy's arm was around Jackie. And that was a moment of love. That was affection, Whatever else happened, that was affection.
And you were in the room for the screening with
right behind them.
Just them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right behind them.
What did they think of it when they saw it?
Well, they liked it, but they didn't see what was going to happen. And anyway, it was an enormous success, of course. And then I wrote a book about it, which is back there. And Jackie she bought a few hundred copies of the book and was passing it out, which flattered me very much.
Did you hear from her after what she thought of it once it aired?
Well, only in the action. That is, after the assassination, she had received so many letters of condolences and so on that she wanted to respond. And I went up to Hyannisport. She chose me to come up and help her. But Bobby was a very difficult man. You know, people don't know that Bobby worked for McCarthy. He was an investigator for McCarthy, and he was very nasty to me.
What was she like with you, Jackie?
Well, she was nice. She was pleasant, and I saw her after she married Ari and come back and become an editor at, was it Viking? I'm not sure. Her girlfriend, Vivi Crespi, was the mistress of Luigi Barzini, and I had made a film with Luigi Barzini, and Jackie was there to look at the thing. She was very nice to me.
How controlling was she of when you were filming actually in the White House and the?
Oh,
Nothing off limits.
Nothing off limits now.
What do you think of the piece now?
A tour of the White House?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was fine for its time, and the White House is special to me. You know, it's our royal palace. It's a fond memory now.
Mm. And that was not shot on film, right? That one was actually 2-inch tape, right? The tour of the White House?
Yeah, it must have been. Yeah.
Yeah. Which was sort of a newer technology at the time?
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Were there any challenges technically to putting that?
Not that I knew. I had a wonderful team.
What do you think is the historical significance of a tour of the White House?
Well, it shows Jackie, who was practically a queen of America, and it gives some credence to our democracy. We don't have royalty. That was Hamilton's great worry.
Mm. When the country was being,
yeah,
when Washington was becoming,
they were afraid that we would import the customs of royalty.
Mm.
But it was Jefferson who was. He's a great man.
Mm. Do you think maybe that's why she agreed to be filmed on television, to sort of let America in?
No. Blair Clark, who had been Kennedy's companion at Harvard, had convinced her. She just wanted a good color book, you know.
But it was pretty well received.
Yeah, it was received. 300 million people have seen it and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But so it was an island. An island.
We're going to take a short break.
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
And we will come back on